Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this meeting of the Planning Policy Committee. Could I please ask everyone to note the fire safety instruction? There are no fire drills planned for this evening. In the event of a fire alarm sounding, please leave the building via the nearest exit and make your way to the assembly point located in the market car park adjacent to the Civic Suite building. Please do not return to the building unless you're given permission by council staff. I would also like to remind you to please switch off your mobile phones or turn them to silent. Please note that the meeting will be live streamed where the proceedings are capable of being repeatedly viewing. Please ensure that your microphone is switched on when speaking and you speak clearly into the microphone. Once finished speaking, can you please switch off your microphone to avoid feedback noise, which I'll try and remember. If you're seated in the public area of the chamber, it is likely that your image will be captured on the recording cameras and as a result in your image being part of the broadcast. If members are, for any reason, not present for the whole debate on a particular item, you should consider whether it will be appropriate for you to vote on that item. May I also remind members to declare any interest and the nature of the interest at the beginning of an agenda item on that subject. On declaring a pecuniary interest, you are required to leave the room when that item of business is considered. Item 1 on the agenda, apologies for absence. We have apologies from both Councillor Gary Myers and Councillor Adrian Eves. Item number 2, non-members attending, none notified, and I can't see any, so no non-members attending. Item 3, minutes of meeting held on the 19th of September 2024. Are the minutes agreed, members? Thank you. Agreed. Item 4, declarations of interest, please. Are there any declarations? Councillor Steptoe.
Chairman, as a member of Essex County Council.
Thank you, Mike. Public questions on notice. There were no public questions on notice.
Chairman, if I may, there was just something on my agenda which had deadline for questions to be submitted for the Environment and Climate Change meeting. I just wondered why this was on this agenda that was sent. Now, I don't know if there's an updated agenda, but the one that I've got electronically actually had that on there, which was quite strange.
Sorry, I used the one I got on through. I didn't see anything on mine other than what was relevant to the. Okay, that's a pro forma error in terms of the title there.
Okay, yeah, that shouldn't have gone out. No, okay.
Okay, thanks. Item 6, Local Development Scheme 2025-2027. Members, we will now consider the report of the Director of Place relative to the Local Development Scheme 2025-27. Officer Jonathan Quilter will present this report. Over to you, Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. So the Local Development Scheme sets out the timetable for preparing development plan documents and core planning documents for the period of 2025 to 2027. It's a requirement of the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act 2004, which requires that we publish and maintain an up-to-date LDS. As set out in the report, there are 3 components of the recommendation. The first to be to note the proposed programme plan in Appendix B. Also to note the progression of work on Community Infrastructure Levy, and to approve and publish the LDS, which is set out under Appendix A. The reasons for these recommendations, as mentioned, obviously we have a legal compliance requirement as set out in legislation. There's also an element of needing to update these documents to provide clarity to stakeholders in terms of how we're going to prepare the local plan. And also there's a government requirement in terms of what the government recently published before Christmas around all planning authorities needing to submit an updated LDS by the 6th of March this year. The purpose of moving on to the next bit. In terms of the one of the other overarching reasons why this has also been required is as a result of the up-to-date MPPF, which was published in December last year, and that was following the consultation that took place earlier that year, which we responded to at the last planning committee. Oh, apologies. No, yeah, apologies. That's my fault. So yeah, in terms of the updated MPPF, that's certainly been a strong factor, or has been a main factor around why the timetable has required amendment. And in terms of those main aspects of the MPPF as set out in the report, there are now up-to-date or updated mandatory housing targets as a result of the new standard method. There's the housing land supply tests, so there's reinstatement of the 5-year housing land supply test. There's a requirement for Greenbelt reviews. There's up-to-date guidance that's due to be published shortly, and the introduction as part of that of Greybelt that needs to be incorporated into those assessments, and also the requirement of the golden rules in terms of any land that is going to be built on that is Greenbelt. So in terms of just to finish off, in terms of the timetable that's been set out, we've got indicated there in terms of the preferred options, i.e. Regulation 18 document to take place in the summer of this year, with pre-submission in the winter-spring of 2025-26, and submission to the Secretary of State in the autumn-winter of 2026. And obviously the process that follows, that will be the examination and eventual adoption of the plan. And also set out, as mentioned, in regards to community infrastructure levy, we've got a programme that's set out in regards to that as well. And that brings it to an end. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Jonathan. Members, do any members have questions, please? Councillor Newport.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Jonathan. So, if I may, Chairman, through you. Jonathan, with regards to the revised proposed local plan timetable, the previous plan timetable was adopted in February 2024. So the changes to this schedule and these dates, so in layman's terms, my understanding is that this is due to the change in the NPPF that the Labour government have brought forward. And also, my second question would be, is there anything that this council could have done to mitigate that? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you for the question, Councillor Newport. Yeah, so in terms of the main reasons that the timetable has had to be changed as proposed, is as a result of those of the updated MPPF. So if we recall back to the start when that consultation was launched, that coincided with a committee that we were due to have we did have in August. And there were a number of documents that we had worked up, and obviously we will continue to work up a programme to get a Regulation 18 consultation out by the end of last year, or towards the end of last year. That had to be paused on the basis of those proposed changes to the MPPF, which were obviously all-encompassing in terms of actually changing the nature of how plans are prepared, particularly in regards to the numbers that each authority needs to plan for. And so that certainly is the main factor in terms of why that timetable has now been set out as amended compared to what was published back in February last year. Apologies, I've forgotten the second question there, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, the second question was there anything that this council could have done to mitigate the slippage?
Certainly, as I've just said, in terms of the programme that we were working on was very much accelerating that and pushing that plan forwards. We was intending, as I say, to have a Regulation 18 consultation last year. So I think in terms of, obviously, clearly what's set out in the LDS then and now is around the risks, and those risks are including potential changes to government policy, which is what's happened. But in terms of any mitigation, it's very difficult because, like I say, there's quite fundamental changes really when it comes to the housing numbers in particular, which obviously have in effect doubled for Rochford.
So I take it there was no mitigation measures that we could have put in place. I think that's why I'm hearing.
No, that's right, yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Ward?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I don't wish to add anything to what was previously said about the timing of this local plan, albeit, as you all know, I totally disagree, but we are where we are. But I'd like to discuss this particular plan we have now. Firstly, I'd like to know who will undertake the Greenbelt Review. Secondly, I'd like to know what the estimated cost of undertaking that review will be. Pardon the lousy cold. And also, will the costs incurred in undertaking the Greenbelt Review fall within the local plan budget as we have it now? And if I may carry on, what is the strategy for undertaking the review in regards to brownfield, part brownfield and contaminated sites, especially on our brownfield register, which may need updating because of, as you mentioned, we're talking of grey belt and need to understand where that may come in to some of the brownfield sites that are already on the register, and do they qualify as grey belt, therefore releasing a lot more homes prior to green belt, and I think that's an important consideration. And can I put a motion forward that this committee now meets monthly? Because I believe there's a lot of stuff that's coming in and going on, and I feel it would be important, you know, for residents around to understand this local plan. I'm getting loads of questions because of devolution, and officers' comeback would be very useful with a fully worked through strategy on the Greenbelt Review. And I think it's important to have a vision and a strategy, which this document actually doesn't outline. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the questions, Councillor Ward. Yeah, sure, that's fine. I think it might just be the microphone. So in terms of the, I'll take the questions in turn, obviously, as you asked them. So in terms of who will undertake the Greenbelt Review, we will need to, obviously, the previous work that was done back in 2018 was undertaken by land use consultants. We will clearly need to, given the length of time since that work was undertaken, we'll need to consider whether there's need to procure that again. So obviously we'll need to go through that process before confirming who those consultants will be. But there will be consultants that would undertake that work. In terms of estimated cost of that work, I think in terms of what we've broadly looked at, it could vary between, say, 30, 40, 50,000, depends. And obviously, I think probably touching on some of the other questions there's still further guidance from the government that's yet to be published in relation to what Grey Belt sets out and things on those lines. So subject to that being published, we will then be able to obviously set up what the scope of that work is. It's also important to add that the government has made it, there is a Greenbelt Review Fund that's been made available, which we've put a bid in for, and that gives the ability potentially of up to £70,000 per authority that could be made available. Obviously that will be subject to them reviewing those submissions, so we'll have to see that. So clearly, either way, even if we're not successful in that case, we have got allocated funds within the estimated budgets anyway to cover that work. In terms of the strategy and undertaking review of brownfield sites, as I say, I think really we need to be waiting for that guidance really about what that grey belt component looks at. As you say, we've got the brownfield register, which is part of that work. It gives us an understanding about the things on the ground as they stand, but we'll need to see the further guidance. In terms of the motion point, I don't know, perhaps Chair, if you wanted to come back on that one. That was the motion for monthly meetings.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. No, I think we've already scheduled monthly meetings, albeit official meetings like this every other month, and workshops in between. In fact, in the next month, we will probably be doing 2 meetings in a month. So I think that will serve your purpose of keeping up with events, because clearly that is a complex issue, and it does do to get round the table like we do and talk it through and keep everybody up to speed. So I'm certainly not going to, on top of that, double the number of formal meetings. I think we're going to be very, very busy and averaging more than that.
Come back.
Go ahead.
I'd just like to refer back to the brownfield sites about priority for brownfield throughout the whole plan. I trust that that's going to be part of a strategy of looking at brownfield first and foremost before we start actually determining any other sites.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Ward. Yeah, certainly that's what's outlined within the NPPF, and we'll be seeking to be in conformity with that. So yeah, brownfield sites are expected to be prioritised before greenbelt land is then looked at. So that's certainly the case.
Councillor Mike Steptoe.
Thank you, Chairman. One or two questions and sort of clarifications, if I may. With grey belt, and excuse the pun, it's very grey as to what that actually means. Will that require for us to have a grey belt register in the same way as we have a brownfield register, which I think might be quite a useful thing to have? With regards to the green belt review, we pretty much know where our green belt land is. Is the review looking at what green belt doesn't need to be green belt longer? And does that then fall into grey belt? Don't quite follow that. And thirdly, with regards to devolution potentially coming forward on your time scale, it is going to somewhat overlap. So will there be a review on times and what's happening as we go forward, say over the next 6 months, taking that further into account depending on what comes forward in that process?
Thank you, Councillor Steptoe. Yeah, so in terms of, I think you're right, at the moment there is obviously, as I say, we're still waiting further guidance on what grey belt actually requires. In terms of whether it's going to require a register, I don't know the answer at this stage, but I think it does certainly indicate, or it seems to be the indication that through the green belt assessment work that would need to consider what is grey belt. So I think that would be probably part of that work together. In terms of a green belt assessment, it's really obviously assessing, as you say, the green belt is determining parcel sizes that would need to be looked at, and also sites that have been suggested, and obviously the appropriateness of those against the purposes of the green belt, which is set out within the NPPF. So I think that certainly would be the similar process to what's already been existing beforehand. In terms of the devolution question, I don't know, Chair, if you wanted to come back on that one, on the devolution point.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, I mean, that is so young at the moment. And Mike, you probably know more than I do at the moment. As far as I understand it, as I've had a small briefing on it, is the decision by Essex County Council and its Thurrock and Southend as well, the senior councils, is to go forward with the request to be included in it. We will then wait the answer from that, whether that's successful and it is accepted, and then they'll be required to pad out the scheme and so on. So I don't think that we can start trying to design the plan around it at this time. We are very aware of what's going on and the least that could happen and the most that could happen. But that's such a wide band now that we can't base what we're doing in the short term on that. And it is an ambitious programme going forward on that. So we will get a fairly early indication of which way it's going. And as I said to Councillor Ward, you know, because we'll be meeting on a regular basis, I think we'll have to be quick on our feet and start to recognise where we've got to move to suit what may or may not come through. But in the immediate short term, until that is confirmed, I think we just keep going with the local plan criteria as laid out by the officers.
Chairman, I take on your points, what you're saying about that. Really, my question was around that I assume officers are going to keep a very close eye on it and then advising us accordingly as we go forward over the next 6 months, depending on what comes out of central government on the subject. With regards to the Greenbelt Review, does that take into account areas that are SSSI? Because we've got quite a considerable number of those. And where does floodplain fit into that? Because we have floodplain and we have Greenbelt, and we have Greenbelt which is in floodplain. So how does that all start to untangle itself?
Yeah, thank you. And obviously, I think you're probably touching at the point there when in terms of what the local plan has to consider, which is a number of key matters, and there'll be other documents that we have to prepare. So there'll be strategic flood risk assessments, which will be considered alongside that. And in terms of SSSIs, we'll be looking at obviously the impact on local sites and of importance such as that in ecological sites. So I mean, the Greenbelt work is very much looking at it purely from a Greenbelt perspective in terms of how that complies with the national policy requirements. But in terms of our consideration, and obviously as a council's consideration, it's all of those evidence documents together that will come together and decide really about how we make an informed decision on where growth could take place. Based on that. So, being, like I say, all those factors as you've listed are equally important, but clearly we need to make sure we've got a strategy that overarches on top of that. There's that factors into the assessment of sites really in terms of how that work comes together. So,
can I come in briefly on that one, Mike? If you remember when we did the sifting exercise, the very first sifting exercise, we came up with I think it was about 8 criteria. And the number one on that list was flooding. So I think in the coming weeks, when we're looking again at what the options might be, that will be definitely be on the agenda as well. So I think that's not going to get missed. Cheers.
On one other point, with regards to the Greenbelt Review, a substantial area, certainly down my neck of the wood, is Foulness and Potton Island, which basically is all Greenbelt. Will that come into the review, or will that be kept outside of that because of the MOD situation?
Yeah. I mean, in terms of there's obviously a number of other factors, as you mentioned there, in terms of that land. It's not necessarily available for public use in that regard. So I think it's certainly, and it's not been submitted for development proposals in the call for sites historically. So I mean, I think that would be a strong factor against the possibility of being able to develop it in that way. In terms of its Greenbelt status, I don't think that necessarily comes in. Probably the other factors would override that really in terms of any sort of consideration of development in that area.
Sorry to drag it out a bit, Chairman. What I was concerned about is if the areas of Foulness and Potton Island are taken into account as Greenbelt, my concern is if that goes against us in the sense that we've got too much Greenbelt, but it's not in our control anyway. So that was my concern, is that if the government suddenly says, well, you've got far too much Greenbelt, you're going to have to lose some, but most of that is then on Foulness and Potton Island. That's my concern.
Yeah, I think that certainly we have to consider the factors of obviously whether that land's available. I think that's the key thing. Sorry, it's whether a lot of it comes down to whether sites are actually available, achievable. There's kind of those tests that come into whether a site is, if there was to be a site in that area. Certainly, as you say, government is they've changed a lot of the criteria when it comes to how we're going to have to assess, in terms of grey belt and green belt and those types of factors. that they haven't given a mandate in terms of saying we have to reduce our greenbelt by a certain amount. What they're trying to make sure is that we can meet our development requirements. Obviously, they're imposed upon us in terms of those housing numbers. That's the real driving factor when it comes to what the government's setting out. So it's not necessarily them saying we have to remove certain areas of greenbelt or not. That's up to us in terms of how we assess that in accordance with the appropriate guidance. So it will be, you know, self-determined in that regard.
Well, I think, you know, the 45% of the land area that's at or below mean tide level gives us a fairly strong argument there. So, yeah, it's dark blue on the map. I don't miss that. Councillor Hoy, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of points, I think. Just going back to the comments around devolution, I think what we're talking about really, I mean, devolution would only be a strategic role by the mayor. I think what we ought to keep referring to is local government reorganisation, which is the real difference that will happen to us, where the it'll be conversion of a district council into a unitary. And I think what concerns me most about that is the I'm not sure how to put this very politely, but perhaps other boroughs or districts or unitaries eyeing up our green belt to build on, and that gives me most cause for the concern there. Just moving on very quickly, I just want to say I'm really pleased to see Sil in here at last. This has been something that's been mentioned in this council for at least the last 10 or 12 years that we're moving towards, and I'm so pleased to finally see it in this agenda with a proper timetable and a budget attached to it. So I really will be supporting this. Thank you.
Councillor Ward.
Thank you, Chairman. There may be the necessity to have a new category, which is excluded land, because Councillor Steptoe mentioned the MOD, and I believe we should have a new category putting in there as special circumstances, because we have all the various other things. But I think we need to actually look at that as excluded land because of its inability to be used outside of MOD use. And I think that may be an important point to actually put in there, to actually refer to that as excluded land. Therefore, it cannot be taken into consideration at all. We're looking at Greenbelt or anything like that. We have no options on that piece of land, and it's excluded from our use, even though it's in our district.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have to consider what the appropriate process is, and I certainly think looking at other areas of the country that have got similar situation, obviously there are other parts of the country that have similar types of land uses, how they've dealt with that through their local plan. I think we need to be consistent. We need to be careful. We're not going to do something that trips us up in process terms. But yeah, certainly, obviously, as we've just discussed, that is certainly a strong factor in terms of that land not being available in that sense. But yeah, we'll give that consideration.
Is it on? Yeah. Thank you. We've got 3 items, R1, R2, R3. I think I need to go through them individually because they've got different outcomes. First one up, R1, that the committee notes the proposed programme plan set out in Appendix B. So we've got to note that. So we move to, can I have a show of hands for 4, please? Sorry? Okay. R2, that the Planning Policy Committee notes that the Council will be progressing work on Community Infrastructure Levy, SIL. All happy with that? Yeah, thank you. R3, that the Planning Policy Committee approves the Local Development Scheme 2528 attached at Appendix A, be adopted and published on the Council's website. Are we happy with that, gentlemen? Yep. All those in favour, say aye. All those against? Any abstaining? Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Jonathan. Item 7, Essex Parking Guidance 2024. Members, we will now consider the report of the Director of Police relative to adopting the Essex Parking Guidance for 2024. Again, Officer Jonathan Quilter will present this particular report. Over to you, Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. So the updated 2024 Essex Parking Guidance provides a comprehensive framework for parking in new developments, balancing demand with the creation of high-quality public and private spaces. It includes general guidance for most developments and tailored approaches for garden communities and large-scale developments. In terms of the key updates, includes residential parking standards, which are now varying depending on location. There are now minimum parking provision standards established for different types of developments, electric vehicle charging, enhanced guidance, cycle parking, improved standards and design guidance, and design guidance that focus on sustainable growth, integrated local data, connectivity and transport services. The recommendation is, as just stated, to adopt this guidance. And the reasons for that is that on the basis that this would replace the outdated 2009 standards that are currently adopted, aligning with contemporary policy and providing a modern framework. The other options that have been considered include developing a bespoke parking guidance for Rochford. However, that was considered not appropriate based on the resource constraints and potential delays to that. Obviously, this work has been undertaken extensive public consultation, working with other Essex authorities through the Essex Planning Officers Association, and obviously has been subject to that process. So in terms of the guidance itself, which is set out in the appendices, it's obviously quite extensive. There are two parts to that, as mentioned. So the part one is the general parking guidance for various types of development. And part two is for the guidance for garden communities and large-scale developments. In terms of those key messages, there's around integration. Parking should be identifiable yet integrated into the public realm. Evidence-based, lower parking provision must be justified with robust evidence. Cycle storage must be covered safe and secure. Electric vehicle charging, including all parking arrangements. And lastly, future-proofing, so parking facilities should allow for future adaptations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Do members have Councillor Steptoe?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Couple of things, really, and I may have missed it in the report, but the two biggest things that I get from residents is with regards to verge parking and pavement parking. Is there anything in the guide, or can we add to the guide in any way, shape or form to help mitigate some of that in newer developments?
Thank you, Councillor Steptoe. Yeah, I mean, I think the guidance, obviously, the aim of that guidance is to ensure there is the appropriate provision of parking to avoid that situation. So I think rather than sort of assuming that those worst-case scenarios would happen, it's trying to be proactive and positive to avoid that from occurring in those new developments, clearly. Obviously, I appreciate it can happen in existing situations, but it's only around those new developments that this can inform.
Okay, the other biggest thing, of course, is around enforcement. I know it's not part of this, but the lack of enforcement is causing major issues around, certainly around my area anyway.
Thanks, Mike. Councillor Newport?
Thank you, Chair. Just one clarification. With this design, with this standards document, is this adopted by the unitaries as well? Is it this? I see a reference to Essex County Council, but does this also involve Thurrock and Southend?
No, thank you, Councillor Newport. No, so this is just the districts and boroughs within the county, Essex County area. So those districts and boroughs, not Thurrock and Southend. So that's where that's covered.
Councillor Ward?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. When does, assuming this is adopted this evening, when does it come into force and when is it enforceable? That's number one. And number two, in it says for both the creation of high quality public and private spaces. So I take it public spaces includes our own car parks. Now, please correct me if I'm right or wrong, but does that mean that the car parks will need to be remarked out as according to this standard? Just a question.
Thank you, Councillor Ward. So in terms of if it is to be adopted tonight, it would become material as of now in terms of any future applications. They would need to consider this new updated guidance, so it would become material for decision making at that point onwards from today. In terms of, as you say, you mentioned it, the public parking, obviously this is dealing with not just residential parking in terms of housing developments, it's dealing with all types of developments. So it could be, for example, a supermarket. But what I would say is it's more around if there was to be a development that took place that required planning permission, then there would need to be a consideration about how that parking is set out. And obviously that would be a process through that would be determined, rather than say all of a sudden existing car parks need to be adapted as a result of it. It's only if there's a material change to that site, for example, a new development that took place, that would be required.
So is there within this document an exemption for everything prior to this date?
Yeah, it's only going to be for new planning applications. So if there's a new planning application to be determined after this has been adopted, this would be material for that in that sense.
What I'm asking is, does this document actually say that?
Well, I mean, in terms of it becoming, it would obviously supersede the 2009 guidance by being adopted, and so therefore that doesn't necessarily need to be stated within it, because it would become something that we would publish as supplementary guidance on our website alongside the other supplementary documents we've already got adopted.
Councillor Steptoe?
Chairman, I think what Councillor Ward is trying to say is, can any of this be retrospectively enforced on existing?
No, it can't be, no.
I think given the last one was 2009, when you think about how much the world's changed since then, electric and so on, it's long overdue, and it has to go forward. Cheers. Councillor Hoy, sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. Just very quickly, I welcome this report. The previous guide, very much outdated, and I welcome the additions to it and the changes, particularly around electric vehicle charging, and particularly a couple of points I generally raise in meetings when I've been on development control, which is around the removal of the ambiguity around the two different parking space sizes, which has now gone. It's just reverted to the preferred size now. And also one of the ones which confused a lot of residents around 4-bedroom houses only still requiring 2 spaces. That's increased to 3, I noticed. So I think it's a really good guide, and I'm looking forward to voting for it.
To the vote. Thank you. R1, that the Planning Policy Committee adopts the Essex Parking Guidance 2024. All those in favour, please show. That's unanimous. Thank you. Move on to item 8. Gypsy and Traveller Accommodation Assessment. Members, we will now consider the report of the Director of Police relative to providing a robust and up-to-date assessment of current and future need for Gypsy, Traveller and travelling show people accommodation in Rochford District area for the period 2024 to 2042. In this instance, Officer Daniel Kudler will present this report. Over to you, Daniel.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, the recommendations are that firstly, the Planning Policy Committee notes the findings of the updated Gypsy and Traveller Accommodation Assessment, or GTAA, and uses this report as part of the evidence base for the emerging local plan, allowing for the development of robust policies and identification of suitable sites for Gypsy and Traveller accommodation. Secondly, that the 2024 GTAA supersedes the earlier 2019 GTAA, which has been used as evidence-based to date. So it's intended to provide a robust and up-to-date assessment of current and future need for gypsies, travellers and travelling show people accommodation in districts for the period 2024 to 2042. It was commissioned through a joint process as part of the Essex Planning Officers Association for all Essex local authorities, jointly utilising a consultancy called ORS. So it allows us to have a joined up picture of need across the county, but they are individual reports for each district and borough. So this period will cover the period for the emerging local plan and the 15-year requirements set out in the National Planning Policy for Traveller Sites. And it's sought to understand accommodation needs for gypsy and traveller population in the council area through a combination of desk-based research, stakeholder interviews, and engagement with members of the travelling community living on all known sites, yards, and encampments. This was a total of 41 interviews completed. A response rate of 95%. There were also 12 stakeholder interviews with neighbouring local authorities, the Essex County-wide Traveller Unit, and so on. Field work took place between July 2023 and August 2023. The baseline date for the study is November 2024 because it takes into account a series of subsequent planning applications and appeals, taking those into account, and a few follow-ups with new sites that the researchers became aware of as a result. So the report provides an assessment of the need for the travelling community based on the definition of a gypsy or traveller, which is set out in Annex 1 of the Planning Policy for Traveller Sites. The definition the report used is for December 2023. It also takes into account recent planning applications and appeals and the impact on the current provision of pitches in the district, informed by local knowledge, using that 2024 November base date. So it incorporates the definition made in 2023, which reversed some of the changes from the earlier 2015 definition, which followed the landmark legal ruling, which meaning that those who have ceased to travel permanently were again included under the definition. Because of the very recent nature of the latest changes for the 2024 definition, so last month there was a new planning policy for traveller sites, which again slightly altered that definition. ORS are currently working through that and sort of getting a legal opinion. But it's not. But according to ORS, it's not expected to change the identified needs that are set out in this report in terms of numbers. So yes, the updates for the planning policy for traveller sites introduced last month by government covered two key points. Firstly, the definition of gypsies and travellers is further extended to cover all persons with a cultural tradition of nomadism or living in a caravan, with the exception of travelling show people and circus people. So it makes it simple but quite broad and encompassing. And secondly, the very special circumstances for allowing traveller sites in the Greenbelt are brought more in line with that 2024 NPPF updates for other forms of development in the Greenbelt. So considering grey belt, more flexibility to review Greenbelt to address unmet needs. And there was some more explicit wording in the earlier planning policy for traveller sites around traveller sites being inappropriate in Greenbelt and unmet need being unlikely to outweigh harm, and those have been removed. So that with all that in mind, the key findings from the study There were 17 private sites with permanent planning permission totaling 33 pitches, no private sites with temporary permission, no sites tolerated for planning purposes, 4 unauthorised sites totaling 14 pitches, and then no travelling showman's yards. It also found that there's a need for 60 additional authorised pitches for households that meet the planning definition up to 2042. And that's made from 10 pitches from households on unauthorised developments, 8 pitches from concealed or double up or overcrowded households or single adults, 17 pitches from teenagers who will need a pitch of their own in the next 5 years, 2 pitches from households moving from bricks and mortar, and 23 from expected new household formation over that period. Also a further need for 5 pitches from undetermined households. So this obviously represents a significant increase on the needs set out in the 2019 South Essex GTAA for Rochford District. And for the immediate current need period up to 2028, there's a need of 37 pitches, with the remaining 23 balanced out across that remaining period up to 2042. Just briefly in terms of next steps, so the council will need to formally consider the need arising from those who do meet that definition, so 60 pitches, and the council will also need to consider how to meet the need that might arise from the undetermined households, which is effectively another 5 pitches, which could necessitate a criteria-based policy within the new local plan. And yeah, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Dan. Members, do you have any questions? Councillor Mike.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of things. You talked about travelling show people. I assume that doesn't include the circus that regularly visits into Rochford every year. I take that doesn't come into the equation.
As far as I'm aware, it doesn't. The travelling show people were based elsewhere, so they're not.
Yeah,
they,
it's
there
not
were
a permanent site.
none of those
It's a-
yards
it's
are
a-
within the
it's
district.
a-
That's right.
It's an annual site, if you like, rather than an over-winter site or anything like that.
That's right. Yeah, there's no sort of residential accommodation from those show people in the district.
The other point I wanted to raise was you mentioned there about the number of sites that we've got, the number of sites that we need. I was trying to listen quite carefully to what you said. What about those sites that are currently under enforcement? And I'm sure you'll know which one I'm talking about in Rawrath, which technically is under enforcement. Does that come into your list of figures? Or if that was regularised, would that meet the need that we, or the additional requirement that we need? Where does that fit into the situation?
Correct, councillor. So the need figures include any unauthorised sites. So the number of unauthorised pitches are, part of that need figure. If they were to be regularised for a planning application, then that figure would be, those would then be authorised sites, and the need arising on those pitches would go off the total.
So we wouldn't need, and if they were to be regularised, we wouldn't need to have any additional sites. Is that what you're saying?
A certain proportion of the need figure is as a result of those unauthorised sites. However, there are other needs that are factored in. So, for example, there are certain pitches that are kind of overcrowded. So you've got more than one household living on one pitch, and ideally you should seek to provide a reasonable amount of accommodation. And then there's also those household projections. So you've got younger people living on traveller sites who might be expected to form their own household within a number of years, and the policy requires you to plan for those as well.
So at best, that would reduce the additional need, not necessarily cancel it out.
Correct.
Okay, that's what I was trying to get at. Thank you, Chairman.
Mike, I can bring you up to date to some extent on that. We've had a degree of success. At the last meeting, I mentioned that there were 3 applications that come in, the unauthorised sites. That is on my efforts to try and get those through. 2 of those have been approved, and the other one's coming forward shortly. And since then, we've had 3 new expression of interest from different pitches elsewhere, and the officers on the development side are assisting those people. We're giving them the information of what they need to do to be able to submit and get considered. So, fingers crossed, you know, we're making quite inroads, and that first inroad was in the site you referenced earlier on.
All of those you mentioned there
Not all of them.
are the ones that are currently either under enforcement or not authorised.
Yes, in the same circumstances unauthorised. So the one you mentioned, there's two already there that have been approved, and the others are coming forward with expressions of interest now, which is what we, yeah, but we're getting there. Councillor Ward.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Just a couple of things. There was something that was mentioned in what Daniel was saying about apparently there is a new appraisal that is on the way through because of changes before this report came out. Is that actual?
Sorry if I wasn't clear on that, Councillor Ward. That's more around the government bringing out a new planning policy for traveller sites in December 2024, alongside their update to the NPPF. So effectively, they've introduced some additional changes to the definition for what is a gypsy or traveller, essentially to make it a bit broader in terms of anyone that has a kind of cultural background of travelling, or you know, that the wider kind of cultural association of that. And then also there were some changes to the wording with regards to traveller sites and the green belt, essentially bringing it in line with what's said around the 2024 NPPF, where you know, obviously they bring around the wording of the grey belt, for example, and talking, you know, and where there is unmet need for housing or other forms of development, there is potential to review the green belt as a result of that. So what they have said is, they've not said it is, you know, it's easier, but I think the wording is that, you know, perhaps does allow for some flexibility.
So, if I may ask, is that reflected within this report?
So this report, our researchers, ORS, are going to provide an additional update as to the implications of those changes for this report. However, what they have said is that the slight changes to the definition for travellers that don't meet the, you know, sort of in terms of what's covered, all the travellers that we have in terms of our need would remain. You know, we would still need to provide for those. However, it wouldn't result in any additional pitch need, from what I understand.
Okay. So basically, what you're actually saying, as long as we regularise the sites that we have, it wouldn't necessarily increase our need?
The need is not likely to change again as a result of the latest changes to national policy. However, the need figure in this GTAA is obviously fairly significantly higher than the 2019 one, so we just do need to bear that in mind.
Yeah, I mean, my big concern, if I may come back, Chairman, is looking at what other neighbouring boroughs and councils are not providing. I'm noticing a lot of applications from outside the district where, you know, we seem to be a prime site to actually come to, and I've seen all the recent applications that have come in from outside where their family connections are possibly Basildon over there, and I'm finding it's a bit distressing as far as I'm concerned that we are being put upon to a greater degree. That's why I'm not particularly happy with this report. There's one item on there I mean, I don't know how carefully monitored this report was before it's been put on there, but there seems to be quite a large error on page 29 of that report. I take it that's part of the ORS report, page 29, where we've got 110 pitches. Yep.
I did notice that one, Councillor. So yeah, we will. we will be going back to ORS and raising that. Essentially, what did happen was that we wanted to we wanted this ready for this committee. However, I think they obviously the consultants probably needed to do a bit of finessing around the details and got it to us as quickly as they could. But no, it is noted, and we will ensure that those changes are made before this appears anywhere on our website. Absolutely.
You happy with that, Councillor Ward? Hold on. Okay, gents, we move on. There's two recommendations here. The first one, R1, is a noting type of recommendation that the Planning Policy Committee notes the findings of the updated GTAA and uses this report as part of the evidence base for the emerging local plan, allowing for the development of robust policies and identification of suitable sites for gypsy and traveller housing. Are we happy to note that, gentlemen? Yes. R2 is a supersedes question, that the 2024 GTAA supersedes the earlier 2019 GTAA, which has been used as the evidence base to date. I think we need to vote that one as it's a supersede. Those in favour, please. It says supersede. Okay, so are we happy with it as it stands then, gentlemen? Sorry, excuse my ignorance on that. Do we need to vote or not?
So, Chair, the way I read it at the moment is it's making a statement that this supersedes the previous document. Is it asking, is the recommendation asking us to adopt this document?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, this is obviously evidence rather than obviously the previous item. Obviously, that was supplementary guidance that we were adopting. This, as with other evidence documents, we would normally note those documents. Because,
So we're just noting it?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Okay, well, we'll pick that up in the minutes with the correct notation there. Are we all happy that it's noted, gentlemen? Thank you. That now concludes our business for this particular evening. Thank you for attending. The meeting ended at 20:29. Thank you.